Hello everyone, and today I'm going to be doing a Roman Emperor's tier list. So here I have not all of the Roman Emperors. I have the ones from Augustus to the last Western Roman Emperor. I didn't include any of the I didn't make this, but this tier list does not include any of the Eastern Roman emperors, and it does not include some of the usurpers or some of the emperors who weren't readily recognized at the time. So I'm gonna have to work with this, and I'm going to get into this. So the first emperor was Augustus, obviously, and he was the heir to Julius Caesar. He was um, great his grandnephew, I'm pretty sure, and he defeated the liberators in the Civil War, and then afterwards he defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. So, as I said before, he's the first emperor. He stabilized the country after a very tumultuous period of time. He secured Cappadocia and Armenia, and he temporarily controlled Germany when he was in power. He won the Cambrian War and also quelled a very large revolt in Illyria. So his contributions helped foster the Pax Romana, which was basically the honeymoon period for the Roman Empire. He revived the pagan religion. He directed taxing on the provinces. He abolished private tax farming, which is pretty cool. He built a lot of infrastructure, and he built temples and aqueducts. So all around, he was a really good emperor, and he basically set the Roman Empire up for success. So he adopted Tiberius as his successor. He didn't actually want Tiberius to be his successor, but all of his other potential candidates to succeed him were probably killed in battle. So he was left with Tiberius, who I think it was his nephew, but I'm not sure about that. So he was an accomplished general in Germania, and he was never supposed to be general, as I said before. He was more withdrawn from public life, but he was the guy who also suppressed the Illyrian revolt. So a lot of historians don't really like him because the historians of Rome, they were usually senators, and he executed a lot of senators. He ended a mutiny of a German legion, though, and defeated a lot of tribes along the Rhine. He cut down on unnecessary spending. He was very fiscally responsible. He reduced corruption, but he ended up getting killed by the Praetorian Guard and Caligula. So that's going to be a common theme. A lot of them were killed by Praetorians, but I'm going to put him in A tier since he was pretty good. Caligula. So Caligula, he, in the eyes of a lot of people at the time, he ended the reign of terror of Tiberius because Tiberius was not popular, but Caligula at the time actually was. Today we don't really think that he was. He was a very young and eccentric emperor, and he reduced taxes and promoted chariot races and gladiator fights. But he also executed his political rivals, and was a pretty sadistic guy. He tortured a lot of people. He actually declared himself to be a living god. Clearly, he was not that good, but a lot of the narratives about him are greatly exaggerated. He wasn't as bad as people make him out to be, but yeah, he was still pretty bad. Claudius, he was the next emperor. He survived the reigns of terror of Tiberius and Caligula. He annexed Thrace, Noricum, Lycia, and Judea. Also, he annexed Mauritania and modern-day Britain. Um, he personally judged a lot of the legal cases in Rome, so that's pretty cool. He improved public works. He pleased the Senate. He reformed religion, and he encouraged public games. He what's thought is that he got poisoned by his wife Agrippina, but I don't think that's actually true. In that Tacitus, the historian who was writing about that, was probably biased against him, biased against Nero, because what happened was Nero succeeded Claudius because Agrippina married Claudius just so Nero could become the next emperor afterwards, because she couldn't be emperor, obviously. So she wanted her son to be emperor, and she could use him to wield power on her own. But regardless of that, I think Claudius was still pretty good, and that a lot of people overlook a lot of his accomplishments. So I put him in B tier. Nero, he killed his mom actually because he didn't want her exerting any more power, but he also promoted public games. He helped her build Rome after the Great Fire that occurred over there. A lot of people say that he was playing like his violin while Rome was burning, but that's just a myth. That didn't happen. He actually helped rebuild a lot of it. He did build a big palace afterwards on top of like the homes of a lot of burnt houses though, and that made him pretty unpopular. He also did blame Christians for the fire, so that was one of the first persecutions against them. And then he ended up getting killed after he started persecuting the Senates. So yeah, he gets a D tier because he wasn't actually that bad in retrospect. He did a lot of bad things, as I listed before, but compared to a lot of other emperors, he wasn't that bad, and his reputation is tainted because of historians such as Tacitus, who was the main source for the events going on in the early Roman Empire. Alright, now let's start with the year of the four emperors. So first we have Galba, and he basically usurped power by means of the Praetorians. He's irrelevant. I need to actually create a tier for the irrelevant people, because there are so many of them that it really wouldn't be fair to put them into a category with all the other emperors. So I'm just going to do that quickly. Alright, so Galba, he was irrelevant. Otho, he was irrelevant. So was Vitellius. All of these were generals during the year of the four emperors, and they all eventually lost to Vespasian. And he was pretty cool because he crushed the Jewish revolt, and he was the main reason that the revolt was quelled. And he rebuilt Rome after 68 AD. He helped rebuild after the Great Fire and all the turmoil that was going on with these civil wars. So he was pretty good, but he also helped construct the Colosseum and expand territory in Britannia. So I give him a B tier. He wasn't as good as some of the other emperors because he didn't really have much time to rule. He died. Well, actually he did, but he is sort of outshadowed by a lot of these other emperors that I'm going to list later on. His son, Titus, he helped also put down the revolt in Judea, and he completed the construction of the Colosseum, and he helped deal with the eruption in Pompeii, and there was another fire in Rome in AD. So he was a pretty good emperor, but he died 2 years into his reign, so he probably had a lot of potential, and Vespasian really liked him. He preferred him to his younger son Domitian, but Domitian, he ruled for longer, and he was actually a better leader, I would say. I put him in A tier, and that's because he increased the Roman Empire. For instance, he expanded in Britannia, a lot of the territory there, but he did also increase the value of the Roman currency, so there was a booming economy during his time. He fortified a lot of the defenses of the empire. He restored a lot of damaged infrastructure, so that's pretty good. But he did fail to take Dacia during his reign, so that's pretty sad. But yeah, he was pretty good, I would say. So the next guy is Nerva, and he started the the period of the five good emperors. And he's considered a good emperor by most contemporary scholars, but I would disagree with that because he didn't really do anything. He ruled for like 2 years, maybe less. Um, he helped contribute to a lot of financial instability, and he didn't really have a lot of power over the army, so they sort of pressured him into adopting Trajan. So Trajan, he was actually a good emperor. So the only reason why I have Nerva at C tier or not lower is because he adopted Trajan, who ended up becoming one of the best emperors in all of Roman history. So I put Trajan in S tier, and that's because he was very good. Let's start out with the fact that he invested in public works throughout the provinces. He reduced taxes there. He um, he annexed Nabatea, Arabia, Dacia, Armenia, Mesopotamia, and then also defeated Persia, which that was pretty difficult. His reign marked the apex of the Pax Romana. So he basically expanded the borders significantly, and then his successor Hadrian, who also gets an S tier, he abandoned some of those conquests and focused on internal stability. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britannia on the border between Roman control on the British island and what's today considered Scotland, but at the time I think it consisted of Picts and not really Scots. So he also did revive a lot of the decaying infrastructure in cities and invested in building projects. There was a lot of peace in Rome besides a Jewish revolt that he put down at the time. So yeah, his reign was marked by a lot of stability and the entire empire flourishing. And then his successor Antoninus Pius, he didn't really do much, but I'm putting him in S tier just because his when he was emperor, there were no wars. He built the Antonine Wall, which was another wall. It was a demarcation line between the modern day Scotland and Roman control of Britain. So yeah, he built that. There was surplus in the budget. He expanded water access. He gave rights to freed slaves, and he helped set the precedent for innocent until proven guilty, which is still used in a lot of Western nations. So that's pretty cool. And then Lucious Beerus, he was the brother of Marcus Aurelius. I'm going to rank him first. I give him B tier because he didn't really do anything. He helped. He was a general in Persia, and he also defeated the Macromani. Besides that, he didn't really do much. It was his brother Marcus Aurelius, who's actually my favorite emperor, by the way, and he was the real deal. So Marcus Aurelius, he was the main guy who defeated the Macromani, but he also defeated the Quadi, the Sarmatians, and the Persians. So that's really good. During his time, there was the Antonine Plague, so that killed millions of Romans. They just dropped dead, and there wasn't a lot of medicine, So it was just ravaging the entire empire, and it was a very difficult time. And despite that, because he was inspired by Greek philosophy and Stoicism, so he was able to get through difficult times, especially with like his entire family dying, and being away from Rome. He fought in campaigns in Germania and Rhaetia and Noricum, that area in Central Europe. He fought there for like half of his reign, and he ended up dying there. He wrote a very good book called Meditations that's still very popular today. So yeah, I really like him. So honestly, if I would put him in right behind Augustus, just because I really like him. His biggest mistake was having his son Commodus become the next heir to the Roman throne, and Commodus, he was pretty bad. Honestly, I'm debating whether I should put him in E or D. I'm gonna put him D. So he ended the wars with the Germans, which could be considered a good thing, but at the time it was pretty unpopular. He devalued the currency so he could fund his lavish lifestyle and public games. He hosted extravagant events and handed out money to the people. So at the time, that was actually something that made him popular because he was like this young leader, sort of like Nero and Caligula, who is now he's hated right now by most people who know him because there's this stereotype that he was very cruel, and there's like that movie Gladiator where he was the main villain. So right now he's thought of to be pretty bad, but at the time he wasn't that hated. But then, like during the last few years of his reign, he thought himself to be Hercules. He actually renamed the months of in the Roman Empire itself, and he named it after himself. He taxed, he increased taxes by a lot, which was pretty unpopular. He also persecuted the Senate, which is why they ended up killing him. So yeah, he's a mixed bag. And then his successor, Pertinax, he took over following the death of Commodus. Um, he tried to emulate Marcus Aurelius, which I respect. So he increased the value of the currency and tried to install discipline within the Praetorian Guard, because the Praetorian Guard was also involved in the murder of Commodus. They were involved in many murders, and that was it's pretty ironic because he actually ended up getting killed by them because he didn't pay them enough. So honestly, I sort of like the guy. I feel bad for him. He probably would have been a good emperor had it not been for him getting assassinated. So I'll put him in B tier. Didius Julianus, he won the emperorship via an auction, so that's pretty cool, but he's irrelevant. After that, it's Septimius Everest, and he created the Severan dynasty. He fought against the Persians, and he actually caused Parthia to collapse, which is pretty cool. He took power away from the Senate and abolished the Praetorian Guard. Obviously, they came back later on, but for the time being, they were gone. He increased the pay of the legions, but what I'll say about that is this ended up having a very negative effect because when the currency became more and more, when it became more and more devalued, and it was necessary to cut back on the pay of the soldiers, they were already used to high pay, and they would rebel when their pay was cut, even if it was necessary. So this set a bad precedent for the future. But at the time, he didn't really know that it would have that effect. He also increased persecution of Christians, and he expanded into African, into the Sahara. He refortified the border with the Berbers, and he invaded Caledonia, which is in Scotland, and he strengthened Hadrian's Wall. So during his reign, Rome was at its peak in terms of territorial uh, mass. So that's pretty cool, but they ended up losing that a few years later. And the dynasty that he set up, it was pretty bad. So his successors were Caracalla and Geta. So Geta was the son of Severus. He was killed by his brother Caracalla. They hated each other. Caracalla, he made peace with the Germans. He was really not interested in the workings of like the administration and actually being in charge of an empire. So he actually relegated a lot of those like tasks to his mom. He increased the pay of the soldiers even more, and he did this by debasing the currency. And I bet he did that just so he'd be on their good side and he wouldn't be overthrown by them. But regardless, that set a bad precedent. He lost the war to Parthia and had to pay tribute. So he was probably one of the worst emperors, I'd say. And then Macrinus, who is related to him, I'm not sure how, probably cousins or maybe like brothers, uh, one of the two. He succeeded Caracalla, and he made peace with Persia and Armenia. He actually cut pay for the troops, and that increased the value of the currency, but he didn't go very far, evidently. So I'll give him a C tier because he did some good stuff. Meanwhile, Diocletian, He was Macrinus' co-emperor, and he was executed by Elagabalus, who is the next emperor. But the Augustinian, he's not even on here, which is pretty disappointing. But yeah, Elagabalus, he was 14 when he came to the throne. He did nothing to deal with the military and economic problems. He spent 4 years partying, and he ended up getting killed by the Praetorian Guard, which is probably the best thing that the Praetorians ever did. Then the next guy is Severus Alexander. He reduced the silver purity, but he promoted justice and supported the Senate. So he was also religiously tolerant, so that's pretty cool. He prevented the Sassanid from making incursions into Roman territory, and he actually tried to bribe Germans instead of them invading and launching raids into Rome. But that actually angered the military, and they killed him as a result. So he still gets a D tier. He wasn't able to solve the problems of Rome, and he actually exacerbated them, unfortunately. The next guy is Maximinus Thrax. He defeated the Germans, Dacians, Persians, and secured the border. He renovated roads, and he ended up getting deposed by the Senate, probably because he favored the military and not the aristocracy. The next two people are Gordian the First and Gordian the Second. They were usurpers. They tried to take power away from Maximinus Thrax, but they ended up losing, so I'm just going to put them in irrelevant. And then there's Pupienus and Balbinus. These two guys, they were senators, and honestly, they had an opportunity to restore the Rome to its glory. This was during the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century. They were aristocrats that had the backing of the Senate. They could have actually restored Rome to its republican years, but they ended up being executed. So they're irrelevant. Then it was Philip the Arab. Actually, it's Gordian the Third. He's the son of one of the Gordians, and he's irrelevant. He oversaw a period of turmoil and then ended up losing to Philip the Arab. And Philip the Arab, he made peace with the Sassanids, increased taxes to build monuments, and pushed back Dacian tribes, but ended up losing to another usurper called Decius. So I put him in E tier because he was really ineffective and he couldn't solve the problems of the crisis of the 3rd century. Decius, he instituted a lot of building projects in Rome, but he promoted persecution of Christians, and then he got killed in a battle by Gothic tribes. So I put him in D tier. Then it's Hostilian. And Hostilian, he's really irrelevant. I don't know anything about him. I just know that he did nothing of note. Besides him, there's Trebonius Gallus. This guy did nothing. He's not important. There's Aemilian. Aemilian, he took power from Trebonius Gallus, but he's not important either. There's Valerian. Valerian, he's probably one of the worst emperors of all time. He persecuted Christians again, and he was taken as a prisoner of war by Persia, which is pretty embarrassing. He was made the footstool of the Persian king. I think his name was Shapur, but I might be mixing up the name of the Persian emperor. Regardless, he goes in F tier. He was an embarrassment. And then it's Galianis. Galianis, he defeated usurpers and a lot of German tribes. He oversaw the secession of parts of Rome. So, for instance, there was the Gallic Empire. A general called Postumus, he took Gaul and Britannia, and he made his own empire. And then in the east, there was the Palmyrene Empire, and he was deposed because he was very ineffective at dealing with the civil war. So then there's a guy called Saturninus. He's irrelevant. I don't think he's even on here. Claudius Gothicus. He defeated the Alemanni tribes and Goths. He also reduced the territory of the Gallic Empire, but he died early on. He had a lot of potential, honestly, but it spoiled the goods. He got killed, sadly. Quintilius, he killed himself after losing to Aurelian. That's the only thing that's I know about him. And now we get to Aurelian. Aurelian, he's one of my favorite emperors of all time. I think a lot of people would agree with me. So he also defeated the Alemanni. He defeated Goths, Vandals, and Sarmatians, and Carpi tribes. He was dubbed Restitutor Orbis, or Restorer of the World, by the Senate due to his quelling of the Gallic and Palmyran Empire, and he abandoned Dacia, which actually makes sense because it was becoming a liability to have Roman territory beyond the Danube River. He promoted a cult for the sun god Sol Invictus, and he promoted coinage reform, which helped deal with the economic burden from the Civil War, because Palmyra, that empire, they were the main exporters of grain, and that was cut off from Rome during the duration of the Civil War. But regardless, he helped save the Roman Empire from imminent collapse, because had it not been for him, it's very likely that Rome would not have survived. So he deserves a lot of respect for that. He was killed by the Praetorian Guard, of course, and that's very sad. He only ruled for 5 years. Imagine what he could have done had he ruled longer. So I'm going to put him in S tier, probably above Antoninus and Hadrian. Okay, the next guy is Tacitus. He shouldn't be confused with the other Tacitus, because there are two people named Tacitus in Roman history. I was talking about one of them before. He was a historian. This guy is some other senator, and he was promoted to the emperorship by the Senate. He fought against Goths and Heruli. He died of a fever 6 months into his reign. So yeah, he's pretty irrelevant. There was a guy called Florian. He was Tacitus's brother. He was defeated by Probus, who's the next emperor who I actually like. So Probus, he defeated the Alemanni. He defeated the Franks, the Burgundians, and he completely wiped out the Lugii. He rebuilt Hadrian's defenses along the Rhine and Danube rivers, and he put down revolts and incursions by Vandals and some Sudanese tribe. He also defeated 3 usurpers, and he was the military for civilian economic development. So all in all, he was a pretty good emperor. I'm going to put him in B tier. And actually, I might actually put him in A tier because he was pretty good. I'm debating between A and B, but I think for now I'm going to keep him in A. And he was killed by the Praetorian Guard, as I said before, and the head of the Praetorians was Carus, and he became the next emperor. He actually defeated the Quadi and Sarmatians again, but he was struck by lightning during his campaign in Persia, which is pretty unlucky. I'm just going to put him in irrelevant because he really was irrelevant to Roman history in the big picture. Besides Carus, there's a guy called Carinus, which was the son of Carus. He lived an ostentatious lifestyle. He left his military alone in the Upper Rhine, where there were a lot of military incursions by Germanic tribes. There was the Persian campaign, which I think he lost that, and then he ended up getting defeated by Diocletian, who I'll talk about in a second. His brother Numerian, he died before any of the fighting with Diocletian. He was really irrelevant. The next guy is Diocletian, as I was saying before, and this marks the end of the crisis of the 3rd century, because Diocletian, he restores the empire to its former glory. He brings back, he doesn't bring back, he introduces the tetrarchy system, where Rome is divided into 4 parts. There's an emperor and a junior emperor, basically. And there are 2 pairs, one for the west and one for the east. So Diocletian, he also waged successful campaigns against the Quadi, Macromani, and Sarmatians. He made gains in Persia. Um, he he also had some downsides. For instance, he waged the Great Persecution, which is a very famous, probably the most famous persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire, where about 30,000 to 3,500 Christians were martyred because of his edicts. He separated and enlarged the empire's civilian and military provincial divisions, and increased currency value using price. He used price fixes on certain commodities, so that sort of helped with the inflation problem that was going on in Rome and the fact that the currency was being debased. So I listed all these stuff, and for that reason, he deserves to be probably above Aurelian. Well, maybe not. But regardless, all of them are really very good emperors, and they're all in S tier, of course. And they deserve respect for what they did. Next page. So, the next guy is Maximian, and he was actually the co-emperor with Diocletian. He defeated some tribes along the Rhine River, but he abdicated in 305 along with Diocletian. But a year later, he tried to usurp power again, and he eventually got killed by another general called Constantine. He participated in the Great Persecution, and he has no redeeming qualities, so for that reason, I feel comfortable putting him in D tier. The next guy is Constantius Chlorus. He defeated this usurper called Lucius. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He also defeated some tribes along with the Rhine, and the Picts. He reduced the Christian persecutions and died during a campaign in Britannia. So he gets a C tier. Galerius, he defeated the Persians. He actually sacked Ctesiphon, which is pretty cool. And he campaigned against the Danube tribes and ended the Great Persecution once and for all with the Edict of Toleration in 311. So I would put him in B tier. All around, he was a pretty good emperor. The next guy is Severus II, or Valerius Severus. So he sent Galerius. He was sent under Galerius to defeat Maxentius. In Maxentius, he's the son of Maximian, and he actually got defeated by Maximian. So that proved to be futile. He's in the irrelevant category. The next guy is Maxentius. He's the son of Maximian, as I said before. He rebuilt a lot of the city of Rome and promoted, as I said before, renovation projects. He was defeated by Constantine at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which is probably one of the most famous battles in Roman history. I would put him in C tier, probably. Licinius, he divided Rome with Constantine following the battle at Milvian Bridge and the defeat of Maxentius. But there developed a rivalry between him and Constantine, and that came to an edge at the Battle of Adrianople, 10 years after the Milvian Bridge, where he ended up losing to Constantine. Constantine defeated him and became the sole ruler of Rome for the first time since Diocletian. So that's a major change in the course of Roman history. But yeah, I don't think Licinius is actually on the tier list, which is really annoying. Actually, he is, but I'm pretty sure this is yeah, that's Licinius. It's just really difficult to see. It sort of blends in with his face. But yeah, I would put Licinius probably in if I had to, probably D tier, because really he was a grifter. At first, he was a staunch ally of Constantine, and then he became more hostile towards him. So I don't like that. Besides Licinius, there was a guy called Maximinus Daia. He persecuted Christians again. He was defeated by Licinius though, So yeah, I'm just gonna put him in E tier because I don't like him. Um, there was a guy called Martinian, but I'm not sure if he's on here. There's Constantine the First though, and this is the guy that I was talking about before as the guy who won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and the guy who defeated Licinius at the Battle of Adrianople. So he converted to Christianity following the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, but I think he got baptized before he died. So think of that what you will. Uh, he passed the Edict of Milan in 1303, which granted Christians tolerance. He organized the Nicene Council, which adopted the Nicene Creed. He built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He built Byzantium, which was a city uh, in between Asia and Europe, and he turned that into a magnificent, beautiful city, which was called Constantinople, and is today called Istanbul. And he moved the capital of Rome from Rome itself to Constantinople, which made sense geographically because it was right in between Asia and Europe. So he increased the size of the cavalry, he stabilized the currency, increased Senate power, established a new gold coin called solidus, which remained the currency of the Byzantine Empire for hundreds of years. And he also defeated the Franks, Sarmatians, and Goths. So all around, this guy was Constantine was amazing. He was a great emperor. He basically transitioned Rome from the pagan times, the Greco-Roman traditions, to the new medieval period. So Rome went through a lot of major changes during his reign, which I think were necessary for the survival of Rome. But a lot of people would argue that the switch from Rome to Christianity actually hurt Rome in the long term, and that because they abandoned a lot of their traditions, that ended up leading to their eventual collapse. But I still like him. And now I'm going to go on to the next guy, who is Constantine the Second. And Constantine the Second, he was the oldest son of Constantine the First, Constantine the Great. And basically what Constantine did is he split the empire between all of his sons and also one of his nephews, I think. And they basically fought with each other for many years in civil wars to basically take over the entirety of the Roman Empire. So Constantine II, he fought a war against Constans, and he ended up losing to him. So I'm just going to put him in the irrelevant category. Then there's Constans, who I just mentioned. He defeated his brother in the Sarmatians and the Franks. He had a reputation of cruelty and ended up being killed in a coup by Magnentius, who was a usurper who is not on this tier list. There's Constantius II, though, and he was another brother, and he defeated all of his brothers, including Magnentius, and he also fought with the Persians and the Danube tribes. He united the empire for one of the last times. It wasn't the last time, but he promoted the Arian heresy, which today a lot of Christians look down on, so a lot of people probably don't like that. He also persecuted the pagans and the Jews, so he wasn't that good of an emperor, but he also united the empire, and during his leadership there was a lot of stability. But he was also very cruel to his family. He killed many of his relatives. The one guy who he didn't kill was Julian, who was his cousin, and then Julian actually ended up taking power from him. So that's pretty ironic, and I think he deserved that. I'm going to put him in E tier. And then the next guy is Julian. He led a successful campaign against the Persians until his death. I think he got killed by a Christian soldier in his army. He defeated the Germanic tribes. He fortified the Rhine River again. He decreased taxes on the provinces, gave more imperial authority to cities, reduced the power of Christianity, and promoted paganism. So basically, he wanted to make Rome great again, basically. That was his credo. He wanted to return to to the traditions of the past, of Greco-Roman pagan culture. And he was successful for a while, but he ended up dying only a few months into his reign, which is pretty unfortunate because he was a very good emperor. And I liked him, so I'm still going to put him in A tier. Also, Constans, he's from before, I'm just going to put him in irrelevant. Jovian, he was the general who helped Julian during the campaign in Persia, and after Julian died during the campaign, Jovian really didn't have any other choice but to give in to Persia, and he had to make a very humiliating peace treaty with the Sasanians, and that basically tarred his reputation, and that really hurt him. He ended up dying a few months later. He paid a lot of tribute to them, and he also ceded a lot of territory to them. But he did restore Christianity as the religion, the state religion. So he goes in C tier. The next guy is Valentinian. He defeated the Alemanni yet again, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, and the Picts, the Saxons, the Scots, and put down a revolt in Africa. He crossed the Rhine and the Danube rivers for the last time. That's the last time that any Roman emperor would cross those rivers. He rebuilt fortifications along the border too. So he was a really good emperor, one of the last great emperors of the empire. I put him in A tier. He started a dynasty. His successor was Valens. He defeated a usurper called Procopius, but he was killed in a humiliating battle with the Goths at Adrianople, and he also lost the Persians. So he's one of the worst emperors, probably. He just got decimated in the Battle of Adrianople. So I sort of feel bad for him, but regardless, he goes in F tier. Gratian. He defeated a lot of the tribes along the Rhine, but he was killed by a usurper, Magnus Maximus. So he's irrelevant. I'm just going to put him here. The next guy is Valentinian the Second, and he was a puppet of a Frankish general named Arbogast. And Arbogast actually killed him after Valentinian tried to exert some more power. So I'm just going to put Valentinian as irrelevant. The next guy is Theodosius. So he defeated Macrinus, and what he's known today a lot. He's very notable today as one of the best emperors because he basically eradicated paganism in the Roman Empire. He made Nicene Creed the state religion. So that basically got rid of like the Arian heresies and a lot of these other church doctrines that were widespread at the time. And he's responsible for a lot of like Christian theology today. So for that reason, he is deeply respected. He also ended the Gothic War, which killed Valens previously. So yeah, I'm gonna put him in A tier. He was really good. Magnus Maximus, he's the guy, he's the usurper I was talking about before. I'm just gonna put him as irrelevant because besides fighting with other generals, he did nothing in Rome's internal affairs. Now we're going on to the last few emperors. So Honorius, he was the son of Theodosius, and he was basically a puppet of the Vandal general Stilicho. In Stilicho, he's one of the worst figures in the late Roman Empire's history. A lot of people have talked about how he was controlling of Roman politics for several decades, and he helped lead to the collapse of the Western Empire 70 years later. And during this time, actually, this time, actually, the Visigoths they sacked Rome under Alaric. So all around, this guy was horrible. He had no power, and for that reason, he goes in F tier. Then there's Constantine the Third. He made Honorius his co-emperor He was made the co-emperor of Honorius, but he then got executed for who knows why. I don't know. Constantius the Third. He defeated Constantine and recovered the land in Hispania and Gaul for Rome. So he goes in the B tier because he actually did some good stuff for Rome. Because Honorius, he was a very ineffective leader, as I said before. He was not able to deal with tribes invading Rome. But then his general, Constantius III, who then became emperor, he was able to deal with it, at least to a certain extent. So he deserves some credit for that. The next guy is Valentinian the Third. He was ineffective at preventing the fall of Rome. His general, Aetius, defeated Attila. But then, probably because he was power hungry and was paranoid about Aetius taking over, he killed Aetius, who was his best general, and that really angered Aetius' men. So they ended up killing Valentinian III. So Valentinian, he deserves a lot of flack for getting rid of one of the last people who could have actually helped against tribal invasions. So the next guy is Petronius Maximus. He was a senator, and he oversaw Rome during the Vandals' sack of the city of Rome. And that happened because he refused to marry his daughter to the Vandal king, Genseric, which is a pretty stupid reason to sack a city, but honestly, he should have done it for the greater good. He was killed while pathetically fleeing Rome on foot, so he goes in F tier. Next guy is Augustus. He integrated Gaul into the aristocracy, and he had pretty cordial relationships with the Visigoths. He got deposed by the Senate, probably because they didn't like him mingling with the Gauls. The next guy is Majorian, and he's the last emperor who was actually good. And Majorian, I'm going to put him in A tier. Even though in the grand scheme of things, he didn't make a lasting impact on Rome. His contributions at the time were very impressive. So Majorian, he spent 4 years campaigning against the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Suebi, the Burgundians, and reclaimed huge swaths of land in Gaul and in Hispania. But he got killed by his Magister Militum, Ricimer. And Ricimer was one of those generals that I was talking about before, like Stilicho or Arbogast, they were like behind the scenes controlling a lot of the affairs of Rome. And Ricimer didn't like the Majorian was exerting so much power, so he ended up getting him killed before he could reclaim Africa from the Vandals. The next guy was Libius Severus, and Libius Severus, he was basically a pawn of Ricimer. He could do nothing as the Goths and Vandals encroached into Rome, so I'm just going to make him irrelevant. The next guy is Anthemius. He actually tried to deal with the threat of the Visigoths and Gaiseric. Gaiseric was the leader of the Vandals at the time, but he got killed by Ricimer as a result, so I'm just going to make him irrelevant. The next guy is Glycerius. He prevented an invasion of Italy proper, like not Rome itself, but the Italian peninsula, by the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, but they ended up invading it 2 years later when he was already deposed, so it doesn't really matter. I'm still putting him as irrelevant. So the next guy is Olybrius, and he was a puppet of Ricimer and Gundobad. Gundobad, he was the nephew of Ricimer. So when Ricimer died, Gundobad basically took over as the man behind the curtain, dealing with all of Rome's affairs. I'm also putting him as irrelevant. Now the last two are father and son, and it's pretty ironic because this guy is named Julius, and Julius, he was deposed by Odoacer 476 by the Ostrogoths. He moved to Dalmatia, and he claimed to be the rightful ruler of the Western Empire, but he didn't really have any of that power, and then he ended up getting killed in 480, and that was basically the end of any attempts at restoring the Western Empire. Justinian tried doing it later on, but that's a story for another time. He was very irrelevant. He could do nothing to save the empire. And then his son, Romulus Augustus, isn't that funny? Because it's Romulus, the guy who founded Rome, and Augustus, the guy who founded the empire. And that's the guy who he was the last emperor of Rome. He was just a boy when he was crowned emperor, and he only had that title for a very short period of time before the Ostrogoths took over the Western Roman Empire entirely, and he was deposed. So this is my final list. I know this video is pretty long, so if anyone's actually made it up to here, then I'd appreciate it. So here is what I have. Tell me in the comments if you agree with my rankings, and goodbye.